Welcome everybody to Congregation Shalom Alot's Influencers and Inspires. We are so glad to have you here as we welcome Rabbi Hara Person, who is the Chief Executive of the Central Conference of American Rabbis, what we refer to as the CCAR, which is the rabbinic body of Reform Rabbis. Welcome, Rabbi Person. We're so glad that you're here.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to the West Coast.
I wish I was actually.
It's 75 degrees today, but I'll just leave that as it is.
Yeah.
Let me take the opportunity to introduce you. Rabbi Person is the Chief Executive, as I said, of the Central Conference of American Rabbis. Previously, she worked at the CCAR as the Chief Strategy Officer. In that capacity, she oversaw the communications department and served as the publisher of the CCAR Press, and worked with leadership on overall organizational strategy. And I've had the opportunity to know Rabbi Person, 15 or 20 years, mostly seeing her in Palm Springs at the local Rabbinic California convention. Rabbi Person was ordained in 1998 from Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, after graduating summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa from Amherst College, and receiving then a Master of Arts, Fine Arts, from NYU International Center of Photography. She was served as the educator at Brooklyn Heights Synagogue from 1990 to 1996, and was the adjunct rabbi there from 1998 till very recently in 2019, I assume when you took this position. Before coming to the CCAR, Rabbi Person was the editor-in-chief of the URJ, the Union for Reform Judaism, Books and Music, where she was responsible for so many amazing publications, such as The Torah, a Modern Commentary, and she helped navigate many publications and significant projects. Aleph Isn't Tough, which is the series that we use for our adult B'nai Mitzvah, Mitkadem, Hebrew for Youth, which we used for many years, as well as the managing editor of a significant and I think a generational, for many generations, book, The Torah, a Woman's Commentary. And she's authored many other things on feminism and the role of women in Judaism. Rabbi Person lives in Brooklyn, New York, and is the mother of 2 young adults. Welcome, Rabbi Person. Glad you are here.
Thank you.
Tell us what the CCAR is and what it does in the life of the greater Jewish world and Reform Judaism specifically.
The CCAR is the professional organization of Reform Rabbis. So similar to what maybe the Bar Association is for lawyers or the AMA is for doctors, we provide all kinds of support for rabbis, and our mission is to strengthen the Jewish community by supporting rabbis. So the idea is that we're going to have a healthy and vibrant and forward-thinking Jewish community if we can really help and support the rabbis. And so we offer services like placement services, and we offer, we have a publishing division. So we do all the books that you might find in the synagogue, like prayer books, Haggadahs, other kinds of books. We offer professional services to rabbis, so guidance and helping them navigate their careers, different kinds of sometimes complicated issues that come up. We also offer personal support for rabbis, and in some instances even for their families. So we run support groups on different issues, and we also offer continuing professional education. We have a program department, so we offer an annual convention, and then throughout the year we have both in-person and online kinds of learning opportunities, so that rabbis can constantly be upgrading their toolkits and sort of expanding what they're able to offer their communities through the kind of learning that they do with us.
I've been honored to be a student of many of those programs and even a teacher in a few of them. So it is really a robust continuing education program that we have in the CCAR. To you, Rabbi Person, how did you go from a master's in photography to the rabbinate? I got to hear this story.
Well, it might not seem like the direct route, but I was one of those kids who was really influenced by my rabbi growing up. And I just thought he was really great. And part of the reason I thought and he was a lovely guy, but part of the reason I thought he was so great was because the area I grew up in was a sort of a unique place. It was Brooklyn. And so when I say Brooklyn, people think of Jews, but this was not that part of Brooklyn. And being Jewish was kind of embarrassing, actually, where I grew up. And it was almost like something to be ashamed of. A lot of people hid their Judaism. It was not in my family, but it was uncomfortable sort of out there in the world. I didn't really understand how to navigate being Jewish. And my rabbi did. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. Like he was just so proud to be Jewish in any setting. And anyway, so I decided to be a rabbi when I was like 11. But then as I grew up, and I was always interested in art, and in particular in photography, I realized, and mostly because I lived in Israel for a year during college, I took a year off and spent a year in Israel. And I realized there that I could have this rich and fulfilling Jewish life without having to be a Jew professionally, which I think is a very healthy realization to have, right? And so I decided not to go to rabbinic school and to pursue art. And I did, and I lived in Israel for a few years after college. I studied art in Tel Aviv, and then I decided it was time to go back to New York. And if I was going to really do this seriously, I really needed to study art in New York, which I did. And so funny thing went along, and like every graduate student, I needed to make a little money to support myself in grad school. And this rabbi named Rabbi Rick Jacobs, who was the rabbi at that time of my synagogue in Brooklyn, he, and I should probably just say in case people don't know what that name means. So he's the head of the URJ today.
Which is the union for congregations. So there are three legacy groups. There's Hebrew Union College, the seminary, the CCAR, which is the rabbinic organization, and then the union, which is for congregations.
Right. And today he's a great friend and a partner in the work that we do. But at the time, I was this kid getting ready to go to grad school, and he offered me, and he was a young rabbi, but he offered me a teaching job and also running the youth group, and also I think teaching Hebrew to adults. And I thought, great, that's a great way for me to kind of make my way through grad school. And I worked there. And then 2 years into that, he called me Labor Day weekend, and he said, the educator who was supposed to have started that, whatever, September 1st or whatever it was, actually just called and said she's not going to come and take the job. Would you do it for a few months until we can figure out what we're going to do and who we're going to hire? And I said, sure, because at that point I'd been teaching there for a couple of years, and I wound up doing that for 5 years. And I loved it. I loved being in the Jewish world. I loved the values that were so real and sort of lived out. And this time, part of it was timing. It was the late 80s into the early 90s. And in New York, we were dealing with really serious issues of homelessness in the city, and also AIDS. Like the AIDS crisis was, such a big part of life in New York in those years. And in the art world, those issues were big, but not in a way that felt at the time to me. Now I'm sort of self-critical about it, but at the time I felt like, okay, great. So I walk into a gallery and there are paintings about AIDS or a site-specific installation about homelessness. What is that really doing? I don't actually think that way anymore today. I think that those are very important things, but at the time, I was really drawn to what the synagogue was doing. Our synagogue was the first synagogue in New York City to house a homeless shelter.
Wow.
Many churches had been doing it, but synagogues had not yet stepped up. So, and my youth group kids were responsible for shopping for the homeless shelter every week, which is a huge responsibility. And they also had this AIDS outreach program. And I thought, like, this is where it really matters. Like, this is what I want to be doing. And anyway, that's a sort of long answer, but that's what
Beautiful
made
answer.
me.
Wow. So you go to rabbinical school, you become a Reform rabbi, and now you are kind of the rabbi to all Reform rabbis. I don't know, how many rabbis do we have in the CCR? 2,000?
We have 2,200 plus, just
2,200.
yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. So what does it mean to be a Reform rabbi in 2020? And not COVID related, I just mean in general. We'll talk about COVID in a little bit, but just in general, what does that mean?
I think it's hard to separate COVID and not COVID because, I think we're going to be living with the effects for a long time. But um, I think part of what it means is being incredibly flexible and creative and innovative, and in some cases, entrepreneurial. I think the systems that we relied on for a long time don't necessarily work anymore or aren't even there anymore. And so we have to be really thoughtful about what is a community? What does a community look like? Who's in our community? How do we financially support a community? What do we do to serve the community? I think a lot of those questions are up for grabs, and I actually think it's exciting. I mean, it's scary, but I think it's exciting and it's healthy to ask those questions.
Very much.
So I think rabbis need to be nimble. I think we need to have a lot of different skill sets, including financial skill sets and how to read budgets, how to raise money, how to think creatively about how we use money. Um, I remember in rabbinic school, a lot of people felt that money was kind of like, people didn't want to like get their hands dirty. And I think that, people don't think that way today anymore, which is a healthy and good thing. But it just in all kinds of ways, how we manage, how we manage staff, how we, I just think that there's so much, and we actually have a reality today. This is pre-pandemic, but we have a reality in which 1/3 of our working rabbis, right? So we have rabbis who are retired, but if you took all the rabbis who are actually working, 1/3 of them don't work within synagogues. Where are they? What are they doing? I mean, I can tell you where they are,
Yeah,
but
please do. That was my next question.
okay,
People think rabbi, they think synagogue, but
right.
you're telling us, 700, 800 rabbis are not in the congregational pulpit.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit less than that, but yeah. So we have rabbis who work as rabbi educators. So they may be in synagogues, but not sort of in pulpit roles, or they might not be in synagogues. They might be in schools. We have rabbis who work on college campuses as Hillel directors or college chaplains. We have rabbis who work in healthcare, all different kinds of healthcare facilities. So it might be, a home for the aged. It might be hospice care, hospital, just general hospitals. We have rabbis in the military. We have entrepreneurial rabbis who are sort of who have created like startups in different ways to serve like specific populations. We have rabbis doing social justice work. Those are just some of the ways that our rabbis serve, in all kinds of creative roles.
Absolutely. I mean, what you said a little bit earlier about the old system's not working so well. I mean, we in the traditional congregational rabbinate give that a tremendous amount of thought every single day. How do you remain entrepreneurial and still be that kind of functioning synagogue with the building, with the sanctuary, with all the things that have really sustained the Jewish people for the last 2,000 years? And I don't think is going anywhere, but we do have to look at it in new and creative ways. And certainly COVID has been a tipping point for that in a very real way,
Yeah.
and an inflection point for us to think differently.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think that the need for community and the need for coming together is any less than it ever was, right? If anything,
Correct.
it's more, right? I mean, one of the things that we're hearing around the country is that numbers are way up in service, in online services, because first of all, people can access in a way that they might not have been able to before. But also people want to access. People want to come together. They want to see faces. They want to talk or pray together or sing together. You know, they want community. So I don't think that's going away. I think some of the ways that it's challenging us is that I think, you know, demographics are always changing, but sometimes we can hang on to kind of old ways of doing things because we can afford to financially or we want to emotionally. And I think one of the things that the pandemic is doing is kind of revealing some of those weak points in the system or the fissures sort of. So um, we're seeing mergers of synagogues now. You know, there are places that parts of the country where there are tremendous numbers of synagogues in one area because in the 60s or in the 70s, Jews were moving to those areas in great number. Today, those numbers aren't there anymore. And so, you know, we're seeing some shrinkage and like I said, some mergers, and that's just the natural kind of life cycle of communities, right? It doesn't mean the Jewish people is disappearing, but Jews aren't living in that place in those numbers. You know, real estate. Do we need all the real estate we have in the Jewish community? You know, I visited one synagogue. I mean, this is pre-pandemic, but it was only a year ago. I visited a synagogue in an area where, again, there used to be a lot of Jews and there aren't anymore. Huge synagogue building. And what they've done really creatively is they have kind of created different wings of the building for different communities. So they have it's a Reform synagogue, but they have a conservative synagogue in one wing that has its own, you know, everything, its own sanctuary and its own oneg room and, you know, the whole thing. And then they have another wing that's an Orthodox synagogue. Like, why not?
Right?
You know, it works for everybody. It helps make the community sustainable. Um, and they can come together around certain things should they want to or should they be able to. So, you know, I think there are a lot of, and that's, again, that was pre-pandemic, but I think there are a lot of kind of possibilities out there for us, which will help ultimately strengthen and enrich us.
I think so. I mean, in Orange County, we talk about this a lot. There's 7 Reform congregations, and how do we collaborate? How do we reduce expenses and increase program? And you know, the pandemic again has been an inflection point for those conversations. Where it goes, I'm not quite sure, but those are really important conversations to have, to be sure.
Mhm.
Um, as I mentioned earlier, Rabbi, there are these 3 legacy organizations: the Hebrew Union College, which is the seminary for rabbis, cantors, educators, and communal workers. There is the Union for Reform Judaism, which is the congregational union or the congregational arm. And then there's the CCAR. And you are the first rabbi who was a woman to be the head of the organization, of any of those legacy organizations.
Mhm.
What do you think that means? And is that an important distinction?
Um, yeah, I mean, I don't think that I can or anybody can separate who I am from the fact that I'm a woman. That's certainly part of who I am. It's part of my narrative. It's part of my life experience. Why has it taken us this long? I think is a great question. Um, you know, change is slow often. I think part of it is numbers. I mean, I think it's really, so we have about roughly 750 women now who are part of the CCAR, which means we're still less than half. But if you look at just the active rabbinate, people who are not retired, we're a much more substantial number, you know, percentage of that number. So, you know, I think it's like a critical mass issue. We're at that point now. There's a critical mass of women rabbis. And not just in rabbinic school or not just among the young rabbis, but among the rabbinate as a whole. So that's part of it. Part of it, I think, is about, you know, just sort of ingrained biases that we don't even think about, but we live with, all of us. I mean, women too. And, you know, we've been doing a lot of work at the CCR, actually. We have a task force on the experience of women in the rabbinate. And we're just about at the end of a 3-year process of kind of study and really thinking about the well, the experience of being a woman rabbi. And, you know, what do we need to fix? Women have been rabbis for almost 50 years. And yet we're still living with things like pay inequity, right? Male rabbis get paid more than women. We have data, we know that's true. There are all kinds of inappropriate comments, sometimes more than physical kinds of contact, et cetera, that women rabbis deal with still today. There are issues of career advancement, professional opportunities. And I think some of it goes to this issue of implicit bias, right? That kind of bias that we don't think about, but is just in our head and activating some of our decision making thinking. So when you think of a rabbi, who do you think of? Like, what image comes into your head? Do you think of you, right, or someone like you, not you personally, right, but a lovely guy with a beard, and or do you think of like a short woman? When you think of a bima and you think of a rabbi, who are you seeing in your head up there on the bima, right? So we still have a lot of work to do to change perceptions.
So we've been very lucky to have, in my tenure here, three rabbis as part of our staff who are female. What can congregations do to help make those changes come more quickly? I think our congregation, thankfully, has been very respectful and done a wonderful job. But, I am sure each of those colleagues of mine and yours have had experiences in the world and even at our congregation that maybe were less than pleasant, and only because they were a woman rabbi as opposed to a male rabbi.
Right. Well, it's a great question. As far as the pay equity issue goes, that is in some ways easier to solve because it's more black and white. So I would say, if you believe in justice in other ways, that it's an issue of justice. So take it seriously when you go into contract conversations with your rabbis. But that piece of it aside, this task force that I just mentioned, we've developed some materials for congregations, and we're just sort of in the process of rolling them out. So we have a series of implicit bias materials that are available for free. And we have one sort of route through the material that's for search committees. So when a congregation's in the process of hiring a new rabbi, they can do this training and really be aware of what's going on in their heads unconsciously. There's also a track for boards. So it's something, or really lay leadership in general. So it's a program, it's a process that a board or whatever kind of group of lay leadership, could go through together. There's another piece. So we're in the process of developing a video program, and it's called the Clergy Monologues. And it's stories from rabbis and cantors about mostly women, but it's about women. So there are some male voices, but it's about women. And they're true stories. They're not told by the person who experienced it. So they're, sort of actors, rabbis and cantors acting as other rabbis and cantors. But they're telling stories about their experiences. Some are funny, some are painful. We ran this program at our own convention, and then we did it at Biennial last year. And the gasps in the room at some of the content was wow, powerful. So we're actually getting it professionally produced, and we're gonna make it available to communities to watch along with the discussion guide. And it really raises a lot of issues. Like, most people are shocked when they hear some of these things. But when women rabbis and cantors hear it, they're always shocked that I got their story. Like, how did I know? And the answer is, it happened to so many people, right? So it's not their story, but it sure sounds like their story. So those are two things.
Well, I'm glad we're addressing it. I think it's really important, and I think that while we've come a long way, there's still a long way to go. And male rabbis have to be part of that conversation and that solution as well.
Yeah,
and
sure.
boards and lay leadership and congregations. And I'm really glad you're raising that. Staying on the same topic of women, though, you've spent a good deal of your writing and scholarship on feminism and spirituality with related to feminism. Curious how powerful that's been for you and how meaningful that's been to you, particularly as I think of the Women's Torah commentary and many of the other writings that you have written. And also, what do you think the impact has been?
Yeah. Um, Again, it's just an organic part of who I am. You know, I see the world through particular eyes, and that has, well, I don't know which exactly is the chicken and the egg, but um, uh, to me, it's always been really important to make sure that we hear women's voices and that we don't just sort of normalize historic male voices without giving room to women's voices. And so when it comes to Torah study, you know, that plays a part in that.
Because because the people who wrote our tradition were 99.9% male, and then the commentators were male, and then the people who wrote about the commentaries were male up until a certain point.
Right, right. And for me, it's not about throwing any of that out.
Of
I
course.
want to hear all of it, you know, and to kind of be to be whole by capturing and learning from voices, you know, all kinds of voices, right? And I think today I would even expand that it's not just about male and female because that's so binary, right? That's one of the new learnings, but you know, sort of a whole spectrum of voices and experiences, so that when we sit down to study Torah, we're reading it through the lenses of so many different kinds of experiences that help us connect better with the text.
Hmm.
That's really important. And that's true, you know, around a table in a meeting as well, that we need to make sure that we're not just hearing men's voices. I mean, even if I may, the two of us were in a meeting earlier today, and and I got a message, a private message saying, "How come only men are speaking in this meeting? Where are the women's voices?" I mean, like, this is today, you know, and I think we still have a long way to go to make sure that everyone's voice is heard and that everyone feels that their voice is welcome. And um,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a great book for people who are interested. It's maybe what inspired you is called Standing Again at Sinai. That really inspired me in a lot of ways to be able to open my mind to other voices of the people who were standing at Sinai. It was not just male Israelites. There were a lot of people there.
right.
So thank you. Thank you for that. So I've been a rabbi 25 years this past June. So a milestone for me. And I can tell you, Rabbi Person, I have never worked as hard as I have in the last 9 months than I did a whole 25 years. And I'm curious, with that said, I'm so glad, A, that I'm employed, two, that I can do something meaningful to help in a situation where people are looking for comfort and for insight and for meaning. So I feel very blessed, even given the kind of level and pace at which we're working. I'm curious in general how rabbis are faring, and I'll follow it up with another thought I have, but let's do this one first. How are rabbis faring in COVID?
It's tough. It's tough, like it is for everybody. But you know, I think because we like to call rabbis first spiritual responders, right? And it's been really tough for rabbis to be there for their communities and deal with their own, you know, taking care of their own health, dealing with their families, whether it's actual health issues, you know, physical health issues, mental health issues. I mean, I think the situation that we're living in has brought up so much fear and anxiety for so many people, and rabbis are human beings, right? So
No, no.
shocking, but true. And so, in the middle of so much loss and grief, to have to be there for people and, you know, put your own stuff aside so that you can fully be present. You know, it's challenging. I think every rabbi I talk to reports working harder than ever. We all are working unbelievably hard. It's true for me as well. Incredibly long days and long weeks. Um, And I think that there are just so many pieces. How do we sustain our communities and keep people connected and keep the community afloat financially, and keep people engaged and encouraged and hopeful, because that's kind of our job as rabbis. How do we do that when we're not necessarily feeling that ourselves, or we need to be propped up, um, and um, and like I said before, I mean, there has been so much grief and loss, and some of it is actual lot, like loss of people we love, loss of congregants. Some of it is sort of loss of being able to make plans, or loss of plans that you were looking forward to. Just the uncertainty. I mean, all of that, and people, of course, have lost jobs, and many rabbis are working at reduced salaries. Reduced benefits in some cases, and that's all really, really challenging. And then, as rabbis, we're trained to be there. We're trained to, put your hand on somebody's shoulder, to where appropriate, give a hug, even just a kind of reassuring presence. And we're doing it all through Zoom, or much of it anyway, through Zoom. Um, there's like this disconnect because it's so not the way we've been trained to do our jobs. Like, how do you comfort a mourner that way? Can you visit somebody at a bedside or not? How do you stand under the chuppah with a couple? So I think that there's this sort of ambiguous loss in some ways about
Very much.
what we're supposed to be doing, how we're supposed to be doing it well and effectively. So it's a hard time.
Absolutely. I mean, every morsel of my being is about bringing people together in community. And
Right.
so now it's the exact opposite in terms of in person. Now I had to relearn how to do it in an online version, and I think we're doing it and doing it fairly well. But it's not three-dimensional. It's not that close feeling. And to that end, I thought. You were really a wonderful pastor to the rabbis during the High Holy Days, both before, during, and after. And if you can just share kind of some of your thoughts about how rabbis and synagogues and lay leaders all fared during the High Holidays, because I was quite moved by your support and encouragement and kind of attaboys and atta-girls as we were doing it.
Thank you. That means a lot. Um, you know, all of us, all rabbis, started worrying about the high holidays like as soon as we finished running the dishwasher after the second Seder. I mean, it was like, clear the table, and now we're going to start worrying about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And it's really not much of an exaggeration. And I was amazed. I mean, honestly, I was amazed. So first of all, I mean, there was so much stress about how to do this and how to do it in a meaningful way. And are people going to care, and are they going to come? And I think first there was like also disbelief, like, do we really have to do this? But the amazing thing is people
It,
came in huge numbers, people cared. And what for me was so inspiring to see was the incredible creativity that rabbis and cantors put into this to make it meaningful and special. And in some cases, it was a combination of what they did online and certain kinds of things in person, carefully and safely and all of that. Rabbis had fun with it. Um, I found it just unbelievably inspiring and hopeful, right?
Yeah,
Because
and I loved how each synagogue, it was a reflection of the personality of that synagogue, those rabbis and cantors. It was great fun to watch and to be part of. And it's so rare another rabbi gets to see a Shabbat service, let alone a high holiday service.
yeah,
But I managed to watch 15 different synagogues of all my buddies, seeing how
yeah,
they were doing, and it was very reflective and refreshing.
yeah.
And people did show up, Rabbi. I mean, we had thousands of screens. I mean, on our stuff. I mean, it's just unbelievable,
Right.
unbelievable.
Yeah. And so I actually have a high holiday pulpit myself, a
Hmm.
very small community. And I did not put any of the kind of work into it that the rest of you did, because I didn't have time. Because I was, helping everybody else. And it's a very small community without resources. But what was amazing to me was who showed up. Like, people showed up from all over the country, and people's siblings or nieces and nephews, my cousins from around the country. Like one of my cousins who was a freshman in college and was so sad sitting by herself in her dorm room, and then she came online with us and got a little cheered up. Like, it was amazing. My mother in Miami, that we could be together in this way that actually
Absolutely.
felt like we were together.
Of
So
course, the challenge of getting my parents to take their iPhone, plug it into their TV so that they could see it, that was a 3-week project, but I got it done. Not for
yeah,
Shana, but by Yom Kippur, I had it done.
yeah. I only could get it done with my mother because my sister got her set up.
Very good. Very good. Couple more questions. Best part of your job and most challenging part of your job?
What did you say? The best part and the
Best
most
part of your job and most challenging part of your job?
the best part of my job for sure is talking to my colleagues. I love rabbis. I love hearing people's stories, even when it's not necessarily like happy. There are challenges and there are issues, but I love hearing the stories. I love hearing why people do what they do and why it matters to them, and that's the best part of my job when I get to have the one-on-one conversations. Um, Most challenging part of my job is when rabbis run into really serious trouble, and then we have to deal with it. We have to hold them accountable. Painful. It's awful. Um,
Yep, that is true. But the CCR does have a rigorous ethics program,
yeah.
and I know it's constantly being reevaluated to make it even better and better, hold people accountable. Um, Last question, Rabbi, and any final thoughts you might have. Where do you see the Reform Rabbinate and Reform Judaism in general in the next decade?
So I sure wish I had a crystal ball.
Me too.
Um, yeah. Um, there's a unique vibrancy to the reform movement, to all parts of the reform movement, that makes me so proud to be part of it. I think we are resilient. Well, I think that's true of us as Jews anyway, um, but I think within the reform movement, we're creative, we're innovative, and we're constantly learning and evolving. And I love that about who we are. And I think the rabbinate is going to look different down the road in the sense of, first of all, diversity. Um, we're going to look, it's going to take time, it's slow, but we're going to look less white, um, you know, over time. Um, there are going to be, I think, a wider range of identities, sexual identities, gender identities. Um, I think that's exciting. It's going to expand sort of who we are and how we understand the world and what we can learn from each other. and I think it will be a better representation of who the reform movement actually is in our disparate communities. Um,
I would
I think,
also, I would just, sorry to interrupt, I would just also
yeah,
ask political diversity as well. I mean, I think that's an area of growth for the reform movement as well. As you know, our ancient Talmud includes majority and minority opinions, and I don't do that as well as we could in terms of legitimate things that good people can disagree upon.
yeah, for sure. I hope that we're heading as a country into a calmer time politically. Who knows? But if so, that's certainly my hope. And then out of that, my hope is that we can learn how to talk to each other better. We can be less divided. It doesn't mean we don't have our different points of view, but if we can sort of turn the heat down and actually learn from each other and be respectful listeners and be open-minded about other people's opinions, that would be that would be a lovely thing to aspire to. Um, in terms of rabbis specifically and synagogues specifically, I think, like I said, I think we'll see more mergers. I think we'll see interesting ideas about how to use real estate and important conversations about um, the importance or lack thereof of real estate. I'm not saying every synagogue's going to just sort of,
Sure.
go meet in the park, but I think, we'll have some conversations we need to have as a community. I think the rabbinate itself may look different. Historically, not that many synagogues employed full-time rabbi. I mean, I'm talking many years, many centuries ago. The idea of synagogues with full-time clergy is a relatively modern phenomenon. And I think it's possible that we may see some revival of that, in the sense that, can our synagogue sustain as full-time clergy all the people who are currently in those positions? I mean, I would love it if that was the case, of course. But I think rabbis will become more creative about how they earn livings and still be able to be rabbis, like once upon a time was the case for rabbis, that you had a profession and you were a rabbi. Is that a good thing? Well, it may just be the reality of
Right.
what's possible.
Yep. Well, this is great. I'm enjoying talking with you. I could ask you 1,000 more questions, and perhaps in the future we will. Do you have any final thoughts?
Um, somebody had said that we live in the most dynamic Jewish time in history. I love that idea. I'm not a historian. I can't say if that's accurate or not, but I kind of cling on to that in darker moments. Um, and there is unbelievable creativity all around us. And I look forward to seeing what new creative ways of being Jewish and ways of being a Jewish community come out of this time of constraint and uncertainty, because I think new things are going to be happening that are exciting, and that will
Absolutely.
help us stay vibrant and responsive to realities.
Absolutely. Well, I thank you so much. We call it the Reform movement, and that's because we keep moving. And I think we keep moving forward with leaders like you and with a rabbinate like ours. And I hope and pray that we will continue these conversations and continue our creativity as we look towards this next decade for sure. So thank you so much, Rabbi Person. Really appreciate it. And looking forward for next time you're on the West Coast. CCAR convention was in Irvine in 2018, and we almost had the service for all the 500 rabbis at Temple, but we missed it by a month because our new building was not quite ready
Right.
then. But we tried. We
Right.
tried.
Well,
Thank you, and be well.
thanks for having me.